right, I'm going to forego the microphone in hopes that you all can hear me just fine. So welcome everyone. My name is Sean Latham. I'm the Pauline McFarland Walter Professor of English here at the University of Tulsa and the Director of the Oklahoma Center for the Humanities, which is the host for this evening's event. I want to get started by just saying a few words about what the Oklahoma Center for the Humanities is and let you know a little bit about some of our upcoming programming. And then I will briefly introduce my colleague, Boris, who is the President Professor of English here, and he will see host for this event. So the Oklahoma Center for the Humanities essentially has two missions. The first of which is to serve as a kind of think tank on campus. And to do that work, we try to select each year a topic, a theme, or an idea that we think can only be fully and richly addressed using the distinctive tools of the arts and humanities. So throughout this academic year, 2022-2023, we're exploring the theme of freedom. We've devised about 35 to 40 public programs around this topic. If you have a moment, if you're here in person, you might want to take a look around the gallery this evening. You can see some more of our work where we're hosting a talk on, or an exhibition on Oklahoma's historic all-Black towns as part of a larger NEH-funded project called Pathways to Freedom. In addition to that think tank work, as I said, we also host a number of public programs, both downtown and on campus, all with the aim of trying to share the work that we do in the arts and humanities, sort of on the other side of the university's gates with a much larger community, and to make clear how important the humanities and the arts are to a healthy civic and democratic life. As I said, our theme throughout this year is freedom, so I want to give you just a preview of a few things that are coming up that we hope you might consider joining us for in the future. So Thursday of this week, we're welcoming Elizabeth Anker from the University of Richmond. She'll be giving a talk called Bad Freedoms, which reflects on all of those sort of the contradictions that attend the idea of freedom and the way in which the discourse, the idea, the concept of freedom can often be deployed in dangerous and violent, even violent ways, as we saw on January 6th, for example, where both sides thought they were somehow fighting in the name of freedom. Next week, on the 2nd of February, we'll be welcoming Siva Vajanathan from the University of Virginia. He'll be giving a talk called The Rhyme and Rhythm of Democracy about the ways in which social media in particular have deformed American democratic practices. And on the 18th of February, we'll be hosting downtown a one-day symposium on Oklahoma's historic all-Black towns. These towns were created in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War as sort of icons of freedom, of prosperity, and of hope for Black citizens, both recently released from slavery here in Oklahoma and fleeing in the Great Migration from the South. So we'll talk about this long-neglected aspect of Oklahoma's history. In the symposium, we'll be welcoming mayors as well as speakers from around the country that are going to talk about these important and relatively unique aspects of Oklahoma history. On the 22nd of February, we'll welcome Blaine Greetman from the University of Iowa, who will be giving a talk called Human Freedom in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And then looking ahead, we have a symposium in March on reproductive rights and freedoms. And in the very end of March and early April, we'll host a gallery show called The Work of Sovereignty about Indigenous sovereignty before and after the McGirt decision. And we'll host a major symposium, national symposium on that we're running in conjunction with Chickasaw and Cherokee nations. And this summer, we'll be hosting from May 30th to June 4th, Switchyard, which is going to be a 5-day festival of music, ideas, and art that will take place all year. You can learn more about all of these events on our website at humanities.utulsa.edu. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We weren't sure this event was even going to happen when the day started, since they were telling us we were going to have, for Tulsa, catastrophic inches of snow to fall. Luckily, it's remained rain, so I'm grateful that you all decided to come out this evening. And of course, we want to welcome all who are able to join us virtually as well. And it's my pleasure to turn the evening over to my newest colleague in the English department here at the University of Tulsa, Boris Dralyuk. For many of you, I'm sure he needs no introduction. His essays, reviews, and poems have appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, the New Yorker, and the Paris Review, and the New York Review of Books. He's an accomplished translator. Indeed, he translated the work of tonight's speaker, and of course, you'll be able to purchase copies of the books that Boris has helped translate from Magic City Books, who is a co-sponsor for this evening's event. So make sure you stop by. Artists make stuff because them to make stuff, and so buy copies of these books. It's an important thing to do. I'm married to an author, so And he's helped us through that translation, really helped bring to us the delicate joys and subtle moments of surprise that define Dr. Osipov's short fiction. Boris himself has just completed a distinguished term as editor of the LA Review of Books and has moved to Tulsa along with his wife, Jenny Croft, herself a decorated translator and writer and a graduate of the University of Tulsa. They now both serve as presidential professors, and it's thanks to them that we're able to bring writers like Maxim Osipov to Tulsa. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Boris.
And thank you all for braving the not quite snow. Maybe it'll be snow by the time we leave here. This is a Russian author, after all. He brings the snow with him. Maxim has been very kind throughout this day. He's appeared in front of one of my classes and answered some questions that I hope he'll also answer for us today. And of course, we're here to celebrate his work as an author. He has been writing essays and short stories since 2007, publishing them in major Russian literary journals. I am part translator of two collections of his work in English. Rock, Paper, Scissors is the first. Kilometer 101 is the second. And as I was working on the stories and essays that make up this work, which draw on his writing for, well, the past 13, 14 years, from the very first piece he published all the way to something written in November of 2021, just months before Russia's full-scale invasion. As we were working on this, the currency of these stories became ever more marked, and the how shall I put this? The relevance of his depictions of the small sins and small faults of Russian society that accumulate like a snowball became more obviously consequential. So I think what I'll say first is that the biography included in the first pages of this book for Maxim changed in the proof stages of the book. The book was released this year, just months after the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion, and we had to add a line to Maxim's biography. Until 2022, he lived in Tulsa, which is a town 101 kilometers outside Moscow. In March of 2022, he left Russia for good. And so I think the first thing I'll ask is for Maxim to, well, tell us that story of immigration. Explain to us what happened to convince you, a man who never thought that he would leave Russia, in fact, tried to argue against immigration, to leave.
Well, yes, that's true that I of immigration, and I always psychiatric disease. Well, but then I found that staying in Russia is another psychiatric disease, much more dangerous probably to one's mind. So when this invasion began, well, I was very critical to what happened in Russia since, I would say, 2010. So I took myself away from all social institutions and spent most of my time in Tulsa, which is a small city, very beautiful, which I miss a lot, and where my son still has, but also a house. The whole family left. And then this invasion began on February 24th. So at day one, we went to a small demonstration in the center of Tulsa, because the idea was that everyone should go to the center of it to protest. And we were not detained or beaten by the police, because police knew all of us, so they preferred just not to notice what was going on. But the demonstration was really small. There were like 5 or 7. And so then for several days, for 4 days, we were just sitting home and watching news on Rain TV. Then this TV was closed. I remember drinking a lot of water. Even alcohol didn't really relax. It was very, a mixture of feelings. Of course, it was anger, fear, disgust, suffocation, this kind of feelings. And then on day 5, I remember I was asked by my Spanish publisher to write something for Spanish newspaper. So I did that, and I simply called it The Fifth Day of War. And Boris, the same day, Boris translated it and published in Los Angeles Review of Books, so you can easily find it.
Well, if I delayed it, we'd have to change the title, of course, if I had translated it the 6th day. A long day.
Yeah, and then on day 6, a friend of mine called me and said, I'm not coming to Tulsa. I'd rather go to Armenia. And I suggest you do the same, because there was a rumor that they would announce, proclaim war status.
And close the borders.
Which didn't happen by now. And then we just left in 2 days. Me and my wife and my son with his family joined us later. So it was very, very emotional, but I don't regret. Because, and there were so many coincidences there. My wife had COVID before that. She really recovered, but the test was still positive. So I came there to laboratory saying, don't even touch, just don't dare. And they were so scared. I mean, they were nice people. Yeah. So they helped us to get this document. She's not infected any longer, whatever. There were many, many, many things. But and the feeling was that, what do you take with you if you die? Nothing. So I even had less than, they allowed like 23 kilos.
In the suitcase.
In the suitcase, I had like 18 or something. I didn't know what to take. So, so we went to Armenia, because it was the only direction we actually could get tickets to. And then after a certain time, we went to Germany. Now I live in Amsterdam.
You described much of this in greater detail, these decisions and these feelings. You called it fear, anger, and disgust. But the 3 feelings that you isolated in an essay that I translated shortly thereafter were the feelings of being cold, ashamed, and relieved.
Yeah.
Once you found yourself outside of Russia. Could you explain a little bit about the shame? Not the shame necessarily of being a part of a nation that has launched an invasion, but being a part of that nation and also leaving.
Well, there is a shame, because I had to quit my doctoral job. And of course, there were patients whom I left. There were doctors who kept working. Some of them left later. And the main shame came from the feeling of relief, actually, because when you have, like in Pasternak's book, when you have a goose for Christmas, it's not a real goose when not everyone has it. So, the feeling of being we for some reason very often we feel ashamed to people who are dying, who are seriously ill, right? Although it's not us who made them sick or to death. We're ashamed to being alive. This kind of feelings, yes. I would say.
when you hold this book in your hands, you'll see that some of the stories and essays are very long and some are quite short. It struck me that some of the shorter pieces, in fact, the very shortest, were written close to the time of your departure, at the very end of your experience of Putin's Russia. And I wonder whether maybe you could read for us one of the very last pieces that we included in the book, which in my translation is called Big Opportunities.
Yeah, I will read. Well, this is a very unusual, very, very atypical story for me because, first of all, I wrote it in 2 days, which never happened. Normally it takes ages.
Yes.
Then thing is, it's very short. I never wrote such short stories. It takes only like 7 minutes. I prefer to measure by the length, not by a number of words or symbols, but by time.
Yeah.
It takes like music.
Yes, exactly.
And I would, if I were more brave, I would put on each story, I would put, moderato or. So this story is really allegro, or presto.
Yes.
And it consists from 3 paragraphs only, but quite long paragraphs. So I will read just to give you an idea how it sounds in Russian. I will read the first paragraph, then Boris will read the whole story, and then I will tell the story behind this story. So, большие возможности. Вообразите себе возможности. Скоро у него будут большие, практически неограниченные возможности. Он настаивал именно на возможностях, которые перед ним откроются непременно, причем в самые ближайшие. Пусть она имеет в виду, говорил он, что у него все хорошо и теперь, прямо отлично, лучше, чем она может себе представить. Она, разумеется, никак не представляла себе ни теперешних его возможностей, ни тем более тех, на которые он намекал. Ей всего-то надо было от него, чтобы довез поскорей. Сейчас и не вспомнишь, куда, в редакцию, в гости, в театр. Им что же, выходит, неинтересно послушать, кто он такой? О, она, кажется, знает, но не станет произносить. Еще один приставучий, болтливый водитель, гордончик. Одно из нескольких слов по-армянски, жаргонных, которым ее... Гордончик, несмотря на проблемы с гласными, куда благозвучнее и ласковее, чем бомбила по-нашему. Хотя означает ровно то самое. Это Москва. Каждый второй автомобиль тут такси. Только поднимешь руку и... Сколько? А сколько дашь? Нет, он не бомбила. Этот все продолжает бубнить. И машина, на которой они сейчас едут, она не его собственная, а служебная. У него самого имеется совершенно другая тачка. Другой пользовался аппарат. Но он не собирается его на наших колдобинах убивать. А подобрал у него не потому, что нуждается в деньгах, с ударением на первый слог, очень по-местечковому, хотя уж кем-кем, и евреем он быть не мог. Но и на русского не похож. Коми, чуваш, удмурт, маленький, но с громадными, по его словам, возможностями впереди. Быстрый, дробный такой говорок и быстрая, но аккуратная в целом манера вождения. Лицо хоть и не безобразное, но и не выражающее ничего. Ему, продолжает он, полагается личный водитель. Однако он предпочитает все делать самостоятельно. Уж не ради таких ли вот встреч. Впрочем, ей-то какое дело? Остановите вон там. Так она пообедать, поужинать, вместе покушать. О, Господи. В зеркало давно смотрел на себя. Нет, зачем обижать? Да и его ухаживание, так это назовем, было не наглым, а каким-то наивным, автоматическим. Глупым до чрезвычайности. Ни удаль, ни ум, ни талант, а большие возможности. Вот чем он пытался ее соблазнить, привлечь. Из человеческого, пожалуй, что только дефект речи. Детский какой-то. Он смешно выговаривал букву «Ш». Попробовал оставить ему то ли 200 рублей, то ли 20 тысяч. Она совершенно не помнит, какие суммы. Отказался. Сунул ей карточку с личным номером. Сказал, он этот номер вообще никому не дает. Никогда. Почти. Так что, если она передумает, непременно, мерси.
Opportunities, you understand? Soon you'd have enormous, almost limitless opportunities. He kept insisting on those opportunities that would open up for him soon, that lay just around the corner. She should know, though, he added, that he was doing just fine as it was, better than fine. better in any case than she could imagine. She, of course, hadn't the slightest intention of imagining his current opportunities, much less the ones in which he was sent. All she needed was for him to deliver as quickly as possible. Who can remember where after all this time? The editorial office, a party, the theater. So what? She doesn't want to hear who he is? Oh, she knows well enough, but she won't say it. Another annoying, chatty driver, a kaleidoscopic, one of a handful of words of Armenian slang she picked up from friends. Despite the cluster of consonants, kaleidoscopic was still, in her opinion, far more euphonious, more affectionate than the Russian bambila, although it meant exactly the same thing, an unlicensed cabbie. This is Moscow in the 90s. Every other car is a cab. Raise your hand and someone's right there. How much? How much can you spare? No, he's no bambila. The fellow yammers on, and this isn't his car. He gets this one through his job. His own vehicle's totally different, of a whole other order, and he isn't about to ruin it on these roads. He didn't pick her up for the money either, pronounced either, with a kind of Jewish intonation, though he clearly isn't Jewish. Then again, he also doesn't look Russian. Maybe Komi, Chuvash, Udmurt, a small man, but with enormous, in his words, opportunities ahead of him. A rapid, choppy manner of speech, matched by a rapid, though generally careful manner of driving. A face that isn't exactly ugly, just expressionless. He's entitled, he says, to a personal driver, but he prefers to do everything himself, for the sake of encounters like this, maybe? But what's it to her? Stop over there. So that's it? Maybe she'd like to have lunch or dinner, get a meal? Oh, God. You looked at yourself in the mirror. No, she doesn't want to offend him. His courtship, let's call it, wasn't arrogant, but rather naive, automatic, terribly foolish. He tried to seduce her, not with a show of prowess, of wit, or of talent, but with big opportunities. The only appealingly human thing about him was a speech impediment, a childish one. His S's sounded like sh's. She had tried to leave him 200 or maybe 20,000. She can't remember what the money was worth back then, but he refused to take it. Instead, he handed her a card with his personal number, saying he never gave this number out to anyone, hardly ever. So if she happened to change her mind, oh, certainly, mercy. Victories of this sort don't bring even a hint of joy, and she would never have remembered the pint-sized kaleidoscopic, considering the number of men who had hit on her before and after, although seldom quite so clumsily, if not for an incident, an occurrence that changed her life forever. They showed up at her door early in the morning, 6 men and a dog, put her 18-year-old daughter in a car and took her away, and then they turned the apartment upside down. She was having the place renovated, and it had seemed to her that it couldn't be made more of a mess than it already was, but apparently it could. She was afraid for her daughter, felt all this was happening to someone else, not to them, not to her, and was ashamed, embarrassed by the piles of underwear, all old letters, photographs. She also knew she needed to fight, of course, to call lawyers, say nasty things to these goons, but her life seemed to be over. What are you looking for, gentlemen? Gentlemen, right? Listen, on what basis are you searching my apartment? On the basis of an order, see for yourself. Extremism, terrorism, anarchy, social media records. When the time comes, she'll hear all about it. The dog alone behaved itself more or less decently, walked around, sniffed a few things, then walked on. She gave it some water. What's this? The one in charge asks her, sounding, for the first time, the least bit interested. A real professional, yet found a card in the lining of an old purse. Name, surname, number, that very card. Give it here, she snatches it from his hands and, without giving herself time to figure out what exactly she wants to say, makes the call. Yes, with the characteristic shh. Their conversation hardly lasts 2 minutes, and she's the only one talking. Tears, vows, pleas. Not the moment for shyness or discretion. He finally says in the same dispassionate tone in which he told her about his opportunities, pass the phone to the one in charge. The man goes out, then comes back. All right, we'll lock her up for a long time if she doesn't leave the country by Tuesday. Never call that number again, got it? He grins. Go over to the station and pick up your darling. Caesar, come. They leave. Life's fucking sense. A half-finished inscription on the fence. Author unknown. The good things, the bad ones, are often anonymous. A number of years passed, quite a few years, because her daughter had since managed to graduate from the university in Lille. While the daughter's Moscow friends and acquaintances, boys and girls from good families just like hers, had managed to serve out their sentences in prisons and camps. They were given from 7 to 12 years. While after numerous adventures and travels, she herself had ended up in her own house in the south of France. And of course, all these years, she'd been following peripherally, out of the corner of her eye, the career of, it must be said, her benefactor, the Bambila, the Kaleidoscopic, following it with horror, since here and there, in Africa, Asia, and even at home, he was invariably to be found at the center of some unthinkable, unimaginable evil, in violation of all divine laws. Until finally she comes across an announcement that he's been awarded a Hero's Gold Star, his second, this time, however, posthumously. In an attempt to save the crew and so on and so forth, implausible nonsense, without even a single believable detail, which is of course never the point, he died a hero's death, along with some number of people. And to her, as to all commentators, it's perfectly obvious that all this official chatter is intended only to conceal, to drown in itself the shameful, disgusting truth of what had actually happened. A drunken death while out hunting, a political murder, or something of that sort. How strange, she thinks. He's lying there in a deluxe coffin, powdered and made up, with his enormous, limitless opportunities, waiting to be buried in the best cemetery next to writers, artists, and composers, all to the sounds of beautiful music that he probably never lived. And would she want to find out that the announcement of his death was false? No, better not to ask oneself such questions. He had done her a favor, been good to her, while to everyone else, judging by the terrible things they write and say about him, he had been exclusively bad. All right, does she feel sorry for this little man with his childish speech impediment? After all, she owes a very great deal to him, if not her own life, her daughter's freedom, the south of France. Maybe she does feel sorry. A little. The story is unusual in the sense that it's very compressed.
Yeah.
But in another sense, I don't think it's as unusual. You'll see that Maxim raised a musical metaphor for the reading of this story, and I tried to read it as quickly as possible. But there's something musical to most of his compositions in that they involve movements, especially the longer. There are point and counterpoint. There are developments that are musical in nature. But there's something else that this has in common with your other stories, which is kind of brutal honesty about small hypocrisies. And maybe you can talk a little bit about both the story that inspired this story directly, but also your depiction of people who are not necessarily all good, all bad. And I'm talking about the woman who uses the little opportunity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this story came up from story of my friend, very nice lady, very good looking, told me, who didn't really follow much of political news, but she told me in September 21, that she was watching TV accidentally at, I think, saloon hair dressing or car repair, something like that, and saw a minister of defense, Shoigu, who is now the leader of one of the leaders of this invasion. And this man, Shoigu, has a funny speech, which is he's saying, instead of saying Россия, товарищ, whatever, he's saying it in English manner, like which is very, very unusual. So, and she immediately remembered the episode from the 90s when this man picked her and tried to seduce her the way you heard, talking about big opportunities all the time. So, and she told it to me, and I found it very funny, of course, and put it into my diary, that, this kind of story. And then the second and third paragraph came to my mind, actually. So I made a story out of it. So this is a minister of defense, and we didn't know the role he would play very soon, of course.
One thing that struck me about the story as I was translating is it gets at something that is, we were talking about this earlier, a kind of endemic fault of the Russian mentality, which was the Soviet mentality and the Russian mentality before that, which is taking advantage of small workarounds because you have no other way of handling the problem. And so corruption kind of seeps in through the cracks. Do you think that this maybe?
Well, this lady, it's hard to blame her
Of
for
course.
trying to help her innocent daughter to avoid, this punishment, totally, cruel and terrible. But I think it comes from the fact that we all lived in, in kind of prison. It was a prison psychology. And my friend noticed, he talked about another friend who spent certain years as a political prisoner, that he always, this second friend, always takes some advantage. So if you tell him, I go to Tulsa, do you need anything? He would immediately say, oh, yeah. There is one thing I need in Tulsa, and he will figure out what actually he needs. So it's just,
never miss an opportunity.
Never miss an opportunity. So we need, even being, I can consider myself being European, whatever. I spend time in America. I speak some English. I read books, whatever. But I even find it in myself. As soon as I get, they say, "Oh, this is a mayor of Amsterdam," and I immediately think, "Oh, what can I get from whatever?" This kind of thing that I try to fight.
Yes.
And I said, no, just nothing. But this is kind of, and it comes from the fact that we were all, some kind of prisoners. Because prisoners do it like this. You never say, no, I'm fine. Yeah.
Happy here in my bunk.
Yeah.
On a related note, we mentioned that you lived in Tarusa, that Tarusa is a nice town, but in a way, you said that moving to Tarusa and drawing yourself away from all social institutions, you depicted that as a kind of internal exile as well. Maybe you can tell us a little bit, for those of us who don't know, what Tarusa represents in the Russian imagination and why it actually is located
Kilometer
at Kilometer 101.
Yeah. Well, Tarusa is, it's very funny. Once I sent this story, the first essay, Tarusa, to American friend, and she sent me a letter saying, "What is Tarusa? Is it state of mind?" She, she never heard of this. Well, it's sort of a state of mind. It's a very, very small, very beautiful city, very important. I would say sometimes small cities like Assisi in Italy plays enormously disproportionate cultural role. So it is a place where Tsvetaeva, Marina Tsvetaeva, or summers, where Nikolai Zabolotsky, maybe one of the best Russian poets of 20th century, lived for a couple of years. And many other. Bolstovsky, after he was released from prison. Bolstovsky, Boris Musadov, Svetoslav Richter, pianist, many others. Joseph Brodsky hid there for 1 month or something. So, Tarusa is a very well-known place. And in my life, in life of my family, it came in 1946 because my great-grandfather was a doctor. He was released from Belomor Canal, from the concentration camp, from Gulag. And there was a rule that prisoners, not only political prisoners, but every prisoners, were not allowed to stay to big cities closer than 100 kilometers. So they called it like minus 30 or minus 50 means minus 30 towns like Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Sverdlovsk, whatever, Tbilisi, Yerevan, throughout all Soviet Union. So he ended up in Tarusa. And Tarusa had no electricity at that time. It was, nowadays it takes 2 hours to get there from Moscow. But at that time, it was a long trip. It was 12 hours because you had to take a ship, even at a certain point, a train, a ship. There were no bridge. I mean, it was totally different world. So he lived there from 1946 till he died in 1967. So of course, after Stalin's death, he got permission to go to Moscow, but his house was very well known there, and he had a lot of intelligent friends visiting him. So it was an important place, which was destroyed by Soviets, by the government. The kindergarten there. I described that in this story of Children of Jankoy.
Yes.
And then in the 90s, my mother wanted me to build a house there, to start getting. So there were many coincidences, and I have the house, but I'm not there. Yes. So next generation, or they will rebuild something.
And you shared with me a surreal, but I think very demonstrative piece of what shall we call it? The arbitrariness of Russian law and the Russian mentality, which is that your house is, I think, I'm not giving away any secrets here. It's a number 16 on a certain street.
Yeah.
But the former mayor of Tarusa
changed the
numbers of the streets to leave his mark on the town. Just changed the number of the houses. So in some papers, it's listed as number 13 and some at number 16. So you don't really know which house you own.
Yeah, maybe. Well, if they announce me foreign agent these days, they say that the property will be confiscated.
So they might
try to rewrite it. They may confiscate someone else's house.
And the risk of being named a foreign agent is increasing for you in the next couple months, because you've started a third career. You were a cardiologist, you were an author. Well, actually, much more than third, you were also a publisher, and now you are again an editor. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the project that you just started and spent the last few days formalizing.
So it's the project of my Dutch publishers. Van Oorschot is the name of the publisher. They have a big Russian program, and they have both books of both collections of stories of mine translated into Dutch, and they were quite successful there. So they offered me to start a new project of anthology or magazine, whatever you call it, that will be issued quarterly. And we gave the name of this magazine would be Fifth Wave, the fifth, because it's the fifth wave of Russian immigration since Russian Revolution. So it will be both in Russian and in English. We very much hope that Boris will run the whole, process of translation and, giving translations to some other translators of his choice. And I very much hope that that will happen. The first volume is ready in Russian. So now it's time to have it in English.
Most of the contributors, that's right. Most of the contributors have also recently found themselves in immigration. And this is, I think, a very common story that biographical notes are changing by the minute. People who were once in Moscow are now in Yerevan, and then 5 months later are elsewhere.
Well, two of them are still in Russia, and all others are abroad.
Could you tell us a little bit? I think that we don't really give much thought, or most of us don't really give much thought to the pressures to emigrate or to stay under these circumstances daily. Maybe you could explain to us a little bit about the decisions the individual decisions that people make to stay or to go. Why would it be difficult for some to leave Russia at this moment, for instance, these two contributors?
Well, some people have elderly parents, sick parents. Some have no money. It's very expensive thing actually to leave Russia because you cannot open. My son, for example, still cannot open a bank account in Germany. Germans would not open bank account to Russian unless he has a job, but he still is proving his credentials to becoming a doctor. So this kind of thing. Well, fortunately to my son, my daughter lives there since 2014. She's a well-known musician, and so we are able to help him. But otherwise, I think it took to the whole family maybe $40,000 or $50,000 to, for all this flights, the set of tickets.
The first tickets
the first set of tickets was like 5,000. Well, I don't want to go too much into exact financial details, but it's difficult, and without bank account you cannot really even spend the money if you have. Visas, very difficult to get visas. Many institutions in Europe, it is prohibited to deal with people who are affiliated with state institutions in Russia. So for people like archaeologists, they all are affiliated, or physicists, they are all affiliated with some state institutions. You cannot be private physicist, or so this kind of things. Many difficulties. So it's individual thing, and I would say that there is morally, if we use a metaphor of, let's say, a group of hooligans entering the train car and terrorizing passengers. Some of them go to another car. Some of them still, are sitting in this car, looking at the floor, and a very, very, few heroes like Navalny, Karamurza, Yashin, they fight these gangsters. So these people I admire, of course.
There's no heroism in leaving.
Yeah, there is no heroism in leaving. There is no heroism in staying. So that's what I think. So it's really individual thing.
We were also speaking a little bit earlier with my class about the relative absence of fiction being produced now about this current situation. And you, I think, spoke very eloquently about why this is not necessarily a moment for fiction. You yourself are not writing very much fiction right now.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so maybe you can explain why that's the case.
Well, I think, it's an observation. I don't have a really, you explained it better actually. When you,
that's what I was hoping to hear. Excuse me if I,
well, we have a lot of very good poetry. So lyrics, I think when something very bad happens to you and you just cry, this cry can be transformed into lyrics.
Yes.
But it's very hard to transform it into real prose with balanced
perspectives,
characters, etc., and controversial, because otherwise it won't be interesting really. It would be manifesto, yes, or political letter, whatever. This we have, but we to have a good prose, it will take years probably. Plus we do not know what will happen.
How any of this will end. In a way, I see the shorter stories that fill out this volume, the ones written later, closer to the to the launch of the invasion, but already after the start of the war in 2014, 2013, 2014. I see them as a kind of movement toward almost something lyrical. Although they still have features of fiction, there is a kind of cru-de-coeur quality to them. They are less multidimensional, less perfectly balanced, complete works. They shoot out into the unknown. And in fact, one of the last stories, if not the last story that you wrote that we included, was finished in November 2021 and carries a postscript that is a non-fictional postscript from Yerevan, in which some of the characters who inspired the story find themselves in emigration. Well, it occurs to me that for a very good reason, this has not been a very cheerful discussion. But I do want to say that Maxim is also a very funny writer. And you saw a little bit of the humor in Big Opportunities, but there is humor buried in every one of these stories. So you can expect some unvarnished truth, but also some very finely varnished truth and a great deal of humor. I'd like to open the floor to a discussion if possible. If any of you have questions for Maxim, both about his art and about his life, feel free to pose them.
Yeah, please don't be shy. I would be happy to answer your question. Please.
Is there a place now that is functioning the way Paris did in the 20s for that wave?
Well, I think it's Berlin. Yeah. Well, I spent 3 months in Berlin. It was very intense. Well, my life was not that intense. I was invited to stay in Wissenschaft. It's translated as Institute for Advanced Studies, which was a very nice place in Grunewald. If you know Berlin, it's a remote part of the city. But I know that there are many Russian events and people keep coming there. So I would say, yeah, Berlin. Well, but Berlin after the revolution also was a very remarkable place. So Berlin, partially Riga, maybe, and Yerevan, Tbilisi. But Yerevan and Tbilisi are not, they are too close to Russia and too dependent from Russia. So people prefer to, so Berlin would be, I think, the most accurate.
To follow up on that, you did mention in one of your essays that you really didn't want to become like a cliche first wave émigré, the kind of people that did sit in Berlin coffee shops dreaming of returning back to the same Russia that they left, not by choice. Could you explain the difference between these two emigrations, the emigration of the first and second waves and this fifth wave?
Well, first wave was, I think this wave is the closest wave would be the first wave. So right after revolution, because people who are leaving Russia are those who didn't plan to leave and didn't want to leave. And some of them, like after revolution, they said, why do you take, boats and furs and whatever? These gangsters will be gone by winter anyway. So there is a belief that this is all will end up soon, but it doesn't look it will. So it may take many, many years, and to live, I don't have many years ahead of me, so I need to live a full life, as full as possible. So yeah, I think it would be wiser to look at it as final. Although, of course, I hope that one day, Navalny would be released from prison and we at least would come and visit and spend time there. Yeah. Although people in Russia would not be very happy, would not welcome us very much. It's tense. It's very, very unhealthy society by all means. So it's not only Putin, himself, but the whole society is very sick.
Maxim, what kind of perspective do you see from your side? What's your opinion? How long it might last? Is it hopeless, or what to expect from as a clever man, from your perspective?
Well, I'm not a political scientist, of course, but clearly if Putin disappears somehow, be killed or die, or, so what is another option? Then things will improve, could improve very quickly, because the next rulers, probably there will be multiple rulers, a committee, of national salvation, some kind of this kind of thing. The West, will hopefully bribe them, because it's impossible to bribe Putin, right? So Hitler, you couldn't bribe Hitler, but you could probably bribe some of his allies, whatever. So there is the best thing that may happen. Or if the West would help Ukraine to defeat Russia, then of course again there could be a change of political power in Russia, or it could turn into North Korea and close borders and encapsulate somehow. So there are many options. So not too many, but all of them are not very good, I would say. And the reason why I'm so pessimistic is that recently I read Isaac Babel with my students. There are Cheka, secret police agents there, and criminals. Well, both are, especially criminals, are quite attractive in Babel's story. Yeah, charismatic in Babel's stories. In real life, they are not. And these two forces actually are the only forces in Russia. So we are not like in Poland when they had trade unions, in the beginning of 80s, Catholic Church, which was strong and opposed communism. So there are nice people, but they do not represent any force at all.
No civil society.
Yeah, no civil society, no institution. Yeah, nothing really that represent them. I wouldn't say, okay, but students are, brilliant, and they would take part.
They're the future.
No, they are the future. I don't see this kind of. Of course, I would love to see Russia, peaceful. The hopes are very small.
Big opportunities.
Small opportunities. Yeah. Interestingly, I asked Boris when he translated it as big, why not great opportunities? And Boris said over the phone, and Boris said, "Well, don't worry, Dickens is still there." Yeah.
Just
I remember.
like
Yeah. Well, don't worry. Yeah. I really admire this translates my stories, and for me it's always the biggest joy. He sends almost immediately the results of his work to me, and to read it, and even to give some suggestions of whatever.
Excellent suggestions.
Yeah, for me it's the biggest joy.
I should say that when Maxim sends me his stories for consideration and for translation, the footnotes are, as tall as the book itself, explaining every little bit of every Soviet and post-Soviet realia to which he's alluding. Very helpful, very easy to work with. I saw you had a question.
Yeah. So there's a great line in your book where you write, "Perhaps we ought to abandon the great literary tradition, the great Russian literary tradition, and give up looking for Dostoevsky and depths in everyone. Shouldn't we instead make a simple medical diagnosis?" I think this line gets to the heart of the tension of being a writer and a doctor. the pull between seeing them as a person and a patient. Can you talk a bit about how you translate your experience as a doctor into writing?
Well, it's a very good question. It's hard for me to imagine myself not being a doctor. So because I became a doctor in the age of 23, and since then I used to be a doctor. So I guess if I were a physical sailor or whoever, I would definitely have another set of metaphors and another maybe set of stories. But I think that in general, the influence of medicine practice itself to writing. I think that my style was more created by the fact that I edited a lot of translations from English into Russian by medical texts. So I try to make them very as short as possible, as precise, and to avoid uncertainties, to look at things directly. This kind of thing of medical textbooks, I would say. To avoid unnecessary emotions, like saying, alas, even in textbooks, and I think it's ridiculous. Sometimes they say, alas, the patient died, after that. Well, this alas is totally redundant because, it's assumed that the doctor wants him to be alive.
That's right.
Yeah. So this kind of unnecessary crap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maxim never uses the word unfortunately. I think
Yeah.
it's just the lack of fortune is so evident. That,
Yeah. So I don't know whether I answered your question. Probably not.
No.
But in a way, well, I would say that it is difficult. The major difficulty of writing medical fiction is, or non-fiction, is the fact that the doctors are presumably nice people. They are good people, and this is that makes it kind of uneasy, I would say.
yes. I think most of the writing by doctors, fiction by doctors that is believable, shows doctors to be as human as their patients. Use of force by William Carlos Williams, things like this.
Yeah.
Maxim does demonstrate this.
And also it's a good Russian tradition. We have doctor writers.
It's not just
But
Russian,
not-
it's
not-
global.
yeah, it's global. Celine was a doctor. Friedrich Schiller was a doctor. Somerset Maugham was a doctor. There were a number of doctors in the world literature. Yeah, but in Russia, of course, yes. Well, first of all, there are a lot of doctors. So some of them write.
Lawyers don't get enough credit as doctors. I'm sure they're just as many.
Please, any other questions?
I'd like to hear about the translation process. I mean, because it sounds like a genuine partnership between the two of you. So I would love to just hear, both from your perspective, here's what it's like to work with Boris. I mean, we talked about like sending your works to Boris to approve for translation or some such thing.
Oh, not a
No.
problem.
Well, but there's clearly some kind of like
No, some
both editorial
suggestions
as well
doesn't mean.
as well as translational.
Oh, there is. There
And
is.
I would love to hear, especially about what is it about his style in Russian that you want to capture and
That's an excellent question. I mean, my sense that what drew me originally to Maxim's work, I was sent a long story of his that appears in the first volume that we worked on, Rock, Paper, Scissors. And in translation, it's called After Eternity. And really, it's by degrees becomes a full portrait of a human life from beginning to end. But it's orchestrated in such a way that you hardly notice that you're reading a biography, that you're reading a life unfold. You think that there will be events around the corner, something local, something specific. But by the end, you come away feeling that you've learned who this person really is and you've seen them unfortunately pass away before you, and you feel that it's unfortunate that this man is gone from this world, or will be gone from this world. And what I noticed was that the style was deceptively simple, deceptively plain, and with ample use of stream of consciousness techniques embedded so subtly that it hardly strikes you as stream of consciousness, free and direct discourse of a sort. But snippets of thoughts will trail away and yet come back. A seed will be planted by a throwaway comment that will recur, and everything sounds as if you're hearing the story at the bar. You know, someone is just telling you a pointless yarn. And yet the yarn comes together into a full thread. And that's what appealed to me about Maxim. I've worked with a lot of stylists whose style is evident. For instance, Babin. You know, the style there is flashy. It's every sentence is a work of art. It's crafted like sculpture. Maxim, if you take an individual sentence, it'll sound like something overheard occasionally, something overheard in the doctor's office, or something overheard on the street or in a cab, or something a person will think to themselves. But the way they accumulate, the way that they hang together as a text was a new challenge for me. I had not worked with anything quite so seemingly effortless, but in fact, quite effortful. Does it begin to answer your question? Yeah. And I think in big opportunities, it's there in miniature, you know, these half-finished thoughts, back and forths, indecisions, and then sudden decisions. Usually they unfold over a larger canvas.
Can I ask, does this sound right to you?
Yes, well, look, I think many authors, I think they erroneously want their text to be translated, you know, they call it accurate, you know, precise. That means that, you know, the translation would always be a loss. And it could be a loss, of course, 5 to 3, or it could be a loss 0 to 10. So, but more likely, if you just, you know, do it precisely, so-called, you will lose. Because, for example, you know, there are game of words or ellipses. In Russian, you can use a lot of ellipses. You may not use all parts of the speech and still create some. In English, it's not possible. So you will have to insert some, you know, noun.
Yes.
You know, English language has different means to be expressive. Or, for example, in the first volume there was a story, Objects in Mirror, but initially in Russia it was fantasia. But fantasia, the word fantasia in Russian means imagination, and it means also the musical or fantasy, you know, the Schubert's fantasy for whatever. So then there is no way to preserve that. So I said to Boris, let's change the name, because, you know, imagination is just a dull name for the story. So Boris picked up Objects in Mirror, which is more interesting. So I always encourage to go away from the original text. Plus, we sometimes learn something. Well, it should not necessarily. Why I put all these footnotes with sources of quotes, you know, explanation of, you know, some realities that may not be obvious to those who in Russia, because I want translator to understand everything, you know, as much as possible. But for reader, it's not that impossible, not that important, because we really love stories not for being, not because we understand every word of it. Like when we read some Latin American literature, we understand that this is a name of food. Really care about the exact recipe, or this is, I don't really care whether it's
How it hits the face, or
Yeah,
where
yeah.
it comes from the north or the south.
Yeah, so this kind of thing, but translators should, of course, understand that.
Need to make a choice that is appropriate in target culture, which is a huge, perhaps, step away from the original, but with the full understanding of what the original says. And I think that this kind of game of compensation is very important. We often talk about what is lost in translation. What we don't tend to talk about is how translators compensate for what is lost elsewhere. You may lose a point here, but you can win the game if you just score it down there. Yeah.
Plus, for a reader, it could be a win because you read and you look at it differently. So for me, saying misdemeanors seems so innocent, and for a person from here, it may seem totally
wild.
Totally wild. So this is kind of well. I think we've
done our best.
At least we tried.
First, Xenia, and then Zhenya.
It was interesting your comment just now on thinking about one of the roles of the translator, finding the destination cultural context being part of the conditions upon which you're making your choices. And so it makes me wonder, as a writer of both of nonfiction and fiction, finding yourself in this new position, living in a new place, living in exile. Has your audience changed, or has your relationship with your audience changed? How do you feel your role right now about who you're speaking to and where you're speaking from as your position?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question, which I do not really have for the final answer. Well, I don't think my audience will change much because I do not really write for certain readers. It's when you write, you try to think, a good piece. But what is good piece? You can say you write it yourself, but for yourself, you don't really need to write the thing. You can, what for? If you live on the island, unpopulated, but you write it for yourself as a reader. Let's put it this way. So, as a reader, I would really like to see it, like this. So this, did not really change much. So I think, of course, the circumstances changed a lot. And since I take a lot from outside, I'm myself quite. I prefer, and I write about things that I know, the material that I know. I need a material. That's why many of my stories are either about technical work or about politics, about chess, about theater, about what else? Music, of course. So subjects that I know. It's not about music, but it is on the material, on musical material. So I, of course, do not understand, things around me. Living in Amsterdam, I am a totally stranger. I have been in Barcelona this year, and I explained that to my Spanish publisher. And I said, look, these two semi-naked women across the street, who are they? In Russia, I would immediately say, I asked him, are they what, prostitutes? And he said, no, they are foreigners. I said, how do you know they are foreigners? Because, it's obvious. They are foreigners who go from one party to another. Didn't bother to take a coat or something. So for him, from these small things, he can, in Russia, I would immediately, say, and there were many stories that really, I didn't know what to think. And in Russia, I could reproduce the whole context from just very small details. So, of course, they exist here as well. Otherwise, you would not have great American literature. There's small things everywhere. But
we decode small signs around us all the time in order to make sense of the world. And we're, you know, I can speak as someone who once was an immigrant. It is maddening not to be able to decode those small signs. You get turned around very quickly.
yeah,
So it takes time to acquire that familiarity, that language, which is a nonverbal language.
yeah, or yeah, you can make one can try to make this misunderstanding as a source of creative, writing.
Yes.
But we will see. I don't really know whether I would succeed as a writer in the future. So I don't know. Please,
And
you
Cheyenne,
had.
Do you feel that there is an anti-venom to the venom of the worsts in Russia, specifically within Russian literature, what we associate with Russian language literature?
This is anti-venom against venom of what?
Worst of Russia.
The worst of Russia, the sins, the faults of Russian society. Can literature serve as an anti-venom?
Sorry, it's a sloppy question.
Yeah,
it's a good
no, it's a bit. Well, I don't really think. I don't really believe that can look at the literature in this way. The beauty. Literature's like all arts serves the beauty, not the practical use of improving. So yeah, I think the answer would be no, frankly speaking. Although I wouldn't blame literature and Russian culture for many crimes. People tend to say, "Oh, Russian literature was always imperialistic." Okay, was British English literature was it not imperialistic? Was French literature non-imperialistic? Well, maybe Italian was not imperialistic because there was no Italy really until 19th century, whatever. But in any case, Putin, Ukraine, not because he read too much of Pushkin or listened too much of Tchaikovsky. It's not their fault. So yeah.
It doesn't hurt to think critically about Pushkin. It doesn't hurt to think critically about Tchaikovsky the way that post-colonial studies have been done of British literature and of French literature. But I think, it's probably true about Putin not having read too much Pushkin.
Yeah, plus these days they look at Pushkin as an author of one poem,
Right,
very
exactly.
short.
Exactly.
I don't know the translation of this the title.
To the slanderers of Russia.
Yeah.
So they look at the element of Pushkin's work that is most useful for the imperial and nationalist message. And like all writers, Pushkin contains multitudes, especially Pushkin contains multitudes.
Well, and Pushkin, there is a saying that Pushkin is our all. Yes, he is our all in terms of this and that. And he has great poems about Islam, about подражание Qur'anu, the imitation of Quran. Would you blame him for 9/11?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
There's a lot to be said about how we read Russian literature abroad and how we read Russian literature in Russia. But to treat it as either the venom or the anti-venom is probably not what we should be concentrating on at this moment. Yeah.
So I tend to say that so when they ask me what is the role of Russian writer and what he should do here and there in this present situation, I usually say that humility is the word we are looking for. We should not exaggerate our abilities to influence the situation, because it's mainly bravenness of Ukrainian soldiers and and let's stop buying gas and oil from Russia. These things. It's time for direct actions.
Right.
The literature acts, or music, indirectly, but at time of direct actions.
Any other questions? Oh, I see up front.
I've never read anything of yours, and what would you suggest I choose
Well,
first?
Oh, what first?
First?
Maybe start.
Yeah, how many time you have? What
Lots
is-
of time.
Okay, then start with book one, I guess. Yeah. I don't know, or
I think you can safely, you'll find yourself in good hands in either one of the volumes, Kilometer 101 or Rock, Paper, Scissors. If you want to understand a little bit more about the current moment, I think maybe both collections have stories that explain the current moment or the antecedents of the current moment. But I think you can work your way backwards. Start with Kilometer 101 and go back to Rock, Paper, Scissors.
Thank you. I will.
That would be my advice. Yeah. But if you have time, as Maxim said,
it's not.
nothing's stopping you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's under $20.
Awesome.
My last question. So who is your favorite writer who put an impact on you? I know it could be several, but the one that, really put an impact on your,
Right.
yeah.
Oof. I don't know. In different periods of my life, it would be Dostoevsky, it would be Gogol, it would be Chekhov, it would be Pushkin, of course. So Russian classical, it could be out of 20th century. It would Trifonov, Yuri Trifonov, a great Russian writer,
Underappreciated and
Yeah.
also not readily available in translation. Although his work was translated during the Soviet period, he has fallen out of favor. There aren't that many in print.
Yeah, so many of them. Really, it's hard to say. I would love to name someone, but Chekhov, although it's so obvious that second Chekhov and all this thing, I don't really like it. We in Russia we have the similar way to name. Like you have first Park Street, second Park Street, third one, 23rd Park Street. So we have this. So I said that if they name a street after me one day, they would call it Second Chekhov Street. Yeah, but this comparison really makes me a bit annoyed, I would say. But yeah, of course I love it.
And then they would change the number on your house.
Yeah.
That's great, yeah.
Can I ask one more? I was going to try to resist this. I'm a James Joyce. So, and the comment you made at the start about immigration or exile was a kind of an illness that then you sort of changed your way of thinking about that. Joyce was famously the kind of writer that could only write Dublin and only write Ireland. That's a Trieste, you had to get away from it to see the little languages described. Right? You have to be able to see them not there to realize how those little details could become something like USA's. I'm curious both about how, if you could just say a little more about what you meant by saying was a illness, and do you think that this will in fact sharpen your perception of Russia by being able to see some of those details that may have been so.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for this question. Let us wait. It's still, for me, it's a continuous run. I haven't stopped yet. It's changing countries, changing occupations. So it's too early. then
Well, it's not too early. I think it's, around the right time. If there are any more questions, please do ask, and we'll probably make this the last question, and then we can chat more freely off Zoom. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for making this almost snowy evening so pleasant. And thank you for joining us over Zoom. And thank you, Sean, again for the warm introduction.
thank you very much.
For me to see if we should have lunch.
I was gonna ask him.
Спасибо вам за вопросы, да.
I haven't worked it out. I got the email.
Wow.
It's my second day. Springing all that great.
Как у нас с вами? Да, где?
В Роттердаме,
А, в Роттердаме.
да. Живут, ну, я была в Лондоне.
Titled, these I don't have them in my head. Yes, here the 22nd.
Да, да, ну стишки там все тут.
It'll be the 22nd is a Thursday, so it'll come in Wednesday.
Раз в неделю.
Policy director.
I think it's great.